Where do you want to be in 5 years or 10 years? I always thought it was some bullshit question, but it turns out if you actually reflect a bit and you think about where is it I do want to go? How do I want to get there? That's a combination of a career vision and the strategy.
Do we plan to help give ourselves an anchor in the present or to give ourselves an escape hatch from the present?
People tend to rate themselves a little bit more highly when not challenged. So what I would encourage you to do as a next step is to try to bring up some examples, try to substantiate that rating.
I'm going to be very quick to talk about ProductTank. So ProductTank is a network of local product meetups all over the world in more than 200 different cities. And we are the ProductTank Paris chapter, run by volunteers, myself and Nesreen and Pritesh, who can't be here this evening. And we change venue. Not all the time. We come quite regularly to the laptop. Very happy to be here. So thank you. But we change venues so that we can also go and see how different product teams are operating in different companies as well. That's all I really have to say about ProductTank. I'll hand over to Pauline to say a little bit about the laptop I'll host for this evening.
Merci. Thank you very much. So I'm very happy to host all those guys. I used to live in London, and I think I've learned everything in London. The right way to think and to produce a good design. So thank you for your culture. So here, I've been. I founded the laptop 15 years ago. So it was a co-working space, a community space, and then it's still a community, a wide community merging other community because it's very open. We don't have nothing to sell except some trainings. No, because we really want that the designer integrates more impactfully the companies. So that's why. So this is the next training that could be interesting for you because it's in English. She's American. She's business designer. She works for IDEO. She's Lisa. She lives in France now, and so that's very interesting to hear about what she has to say. Is because she comes from the business side, and now she's a designer. So it's very. I hope it will. What I'm saying now is linked to what you'll say, but the impact is just totally different. So that's my aim now as a laptop. The community, the training is really to get all those skills, the business, design, dev, and product management to work together and brilliantly. So I'm very happy to listen to you and to discover your vision. So thank you for organizing that.
So yeah, as Pauline shared, we have two great speakers today to talk about our topic of product thinking turned inward, really thinking about our careers, our organizations, how we apply all these great product skills to things that we do that are not just the products that we build. And first up, we're going to be hearing from James and then followed by Matt. So I'll hand over to you.
Well, thank you so much to the ProductTank Paris community for having me. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm going to be talking about managing your career like a product manager because so many of you, right, you invest your time and energy in building products. And I want to talk with you about how you can apply those skills and those mechanisms to the most important product you'll ever manage, which is your career. But first, I want to start by asking a question. Who in here has a product roadmap by show of hands? Okay, a few of you. All right. What is the roadmap for? Shows you what you're working on now, what you're going to work on maybe next, what you're going to work on later. It's just an artifact, right? It's a written artifact that you can pull out, share with people if you need to, so they can understand what you're working on. But imagine for a moment how difficult it would be to achieve outcomes that matter to the company if no one knew what you were working on. Be a little bit chaotic. That's why we have them. But who here has a written plan for what you're doing in your career? I always love seeing at least one or two hands. I see a little bit of a somewhat. This is great. But again, imagine you're managing your career, right? Something you're going to be spending 40 to 45 years doing, hopefully not more than that. But surprisingly, too few people apply these types of mechanisms to their careers. And I'm on a mission to change that. So who am I? My name's James Gunaca, and I've been doing product management and marketing for the last 20 years across different parts of the United States, including the Bay Area and Seattle, but also here in Europe now for the last 6 years. I currently live in London, and I'm actually one of the organizers for ProductTank London. So, yes, thank you. If you ever find yourself up there, be sure to reach out to me or anyone else on our organizer group. That's just a QR code to my website. I also write a newsletter, free to subscribe. I don't take subscriptions on my newsletter, but I write product advice for people for their career. Welcome any of you to connect with me there. But I've also been working with product managers around the world. So I've directly coached hundreds of PMs from as far west as San Francisco to as far east as Singapore on achieving outcomes that matter to them. So that's a bit about me. But this idea of managing your career like a product manager, like what do I actually mean by that? Well, as PMs, you're familiar with mechanisms. And so let's look at what some of those are. You've got product vision as a starting point, right? What problem are you trying to solve? Long term, what do you want your product to achieve, right? That's the product vision. Usually it's a few years out. You've got product strategy. What are those big building blocks or those big strategic outcomes on the way to realizing that vision? You have your product roadmap, like I talked about, right? It says what you're going to be working on now, next, maybe a little bit after that, not too far into the future, hopefully. Then your product has features. Some things used a lot, some you built and no one uses them at all. Sometimes things that you just need to improve upon. Then you got mechanisms to manage all this stuff. You got retrospectives, quarterly business reviews, these things, these rituals that you have to make sure everything's kind of keeping in order and you're staying on track to achieve those strategic outcomes to eventually realize that vision. Now, what I've learned by working with PMs around the world is that these mechanisms actually adapt incredibly well to managing something like a career. So let's look at what that would be if we swap these out. Common question people where I'm from were asked is, where do you want to be in 5 years or 10 years? I always thought it was some bullshit question. But it turns out if you actually reflect a bit and you think about where is it I do want to go, how do I want to get there? That's a combination of a career vision and the strategy. So if you have a career vision statement like, hey, I want to found a fintech startup, right? Not my vision. It's one of someone that I've worked with. Well, if they're a PM earlier in their career, what are some of the big things that have to happen for them to feel prepared to do that successfully? Well, maybe they've never worked in fintech, so they want to go and build some of that institutional knowledge in that domain. Or maybe they want to be in a position where they can hire the right talent, but they've never been a manager before. These are some strategic outcomes that might go into their long-term career plan and their career roadmap, right? Again, what are you working on right now that's going to help you achieve the next strategic outcome? For many, it can be, I want to get promoted. I want to get to the next level. For others, it might be, I want to switch into a leadership position, or I want to go manage teams. So what are you working on right now in your career that's going to get you there? Then finally, you have skills. That's actually what I'm going to talk to you about in a bit more detail tonight. Your skills are the things that you do really well, or that maybe you don't do well, or maybe you don't do it all and you're trying to understand, should I invest in building this skill or not? But when you stop and think, hey, is learning this skill going to be tied to an outcome I can achieve in my career? That can really help you understand if it's worth investing in building that skill or not. Then finally, mechanisms. Most people do these in the form of annual performance reviews, right? This is not something that you have as a mechanism for your career, but it's one that you find yourself in at places that you work. But these regular check-ins, kind of reflecting on the progress that you're making, these are all things that can help you achieve better outcomes. That's why we use them in product. But if you use them for yourself, you can achieve outcomes that actually matter to you because it's your career and no one is going to take ownership of it more than you. So I want to dive into skills with you all today. This is going to be interactive. Do not have any cell reception. Let us know. We've got a Wi-Fi network. But go ahead and give this code a scan. I'm going to walk you through it. But we're going to do a skill assessment together so you can better understand where you are to then inform what you might go do on your roadmap. So this is what you're going to see, although it'll be a phone-sized screen. Asks for name and email. I'm not going to send you any emails without your permission, so don't worry. It's just to send you your results. And we're going to walk through a couple of questions together. It'll be like this. What level of experience do you have with this skill? And you're going to be doing a self-rating from 0 to 3. 0 typically is, I have no experience. I've never done this. 3 is, you're so good at it, you could teach or have taught other people how to do it. Okay, so here's continuous discovery. I'm going to walk through the skills. But I built this skill assessment and I broke it into 4 different categories that align with the different parts of the product development lifecycle. So you've got discovery, you've got strategy, and you've got delivery. But since product management is also a highly collaborative job, there's a group of skills related to working with people. So I'm going to walk with what these are, right? So feel free to continue filling out those questions. It's quite straightforward. But on the discovery side, you've got continuous discovery, which if you've read any of the books, you know is important. You've got writing requirements, doing customer research, doing market research, writing business cases. The ones in bold are the ones that are included in the assessment we're doing today. Now, I have 26 different skills in the complete assessment, but I only have so much time and people only have so much attention to do this in real time. So we're not going through all of them. Then you've got strategy, right? Obviously, writing product vision, product strategy. These are things that you would do in your career. You've got OKR and goal setting, depending on which one your company favors. Road mapping, prioritization, go-to-market. On the delivery side, you've got continuous delivery. This is common in software development environments. You know, some PMs do work on hardware. They maybe don't have continuous delivery. But then you've got other delivery mechanisms. You've got instrumentation, right? Building the ability to report on things that your product does. And then you've got analysis, right? Being able to report out on how your product's being used to inform decisions that you... But then you have this people category. It's the longest list. Because we work with so many different functions, but the way we work with them ends up being different because the needs, because what matters to an engineer is different than maybe what matters to a designer. Collaboration with a leader is different than working with managers of other functions. Then you've got internal communication, right? Emails, Slack messages, documents that you write, presentations that you give, line management, if that's something that is important to you. Earning trust, I think this is really important, right? If we don't have the trust of our stakeholders and our partners, we can't get things done. Influencing, right? Something that is a factor of having someone's trust, but we need to be able to effectively influence because we don't have the authority to make all the decisions ourselves in most cases. And then storytelling, this is actually what I believe to be the MVP or most valuable skill of all, just because of its applications across everything that you do. And then finally, resilience. This is one that I added to the assessment this year, thanks to the input from both another coach, but also another ProductTank organizer from Germany, because the importance of resilience, especially in the climate of the last few years in tech. I think it was just over the last week alone, my former employer announced another 30,000 layoffs. And making it through something like that requires resilience. Making it through companies who are cutting funding because they can't really substantiate the impact. Call out to my friend Matt, who's going to talk later. If they can't substantiate the impact, right, then that can affect their job security. So you need to have resilience in what you're doing. Okay, so when you're done, you'll see something like this. You get a little spider radar chart, and you have some depth across these different categories. I'm going to walk through some examples next. What I typically see when doing this assessment with people. So let's take a look at Product Manager A. They index really high on the people skills, really high on strategy, really high on discovery, but really low on delivery. Does anyone want to take a guess at what kind of environment this product manager works in? Not delivering anything at a startup? Bad news. What's kind? Got it. Oh, is it like a consulting company or stock exchange listed company? Okay. Yeah, so some PMs maybe work at companies where they have a delivery team, right? So the product manager doesn't do any of that delivery stuff. Other examples I've seen are consultants, people who will go out, they'll write product strategy, they'll work with lots of different stakeholders, they'll do a bunch of research up front, but then they won't be there at all to see the product get built. Now, this doesn't mean that this product manager is any better or worse than others. This just shows them where is the gap. Let's look at another example. Product Manager B. really high on delivery, but not so high on people strategy. Maybe does a little bit of discovery. Anyone want to take a guess at what kind of company this PM works? Corporate engineering? Anyone else? Startup? Okay, maybe delivers a ton, right? Another agency? So I've also seen this one. These are all great inputs, by the way. I've seen this one commonly associated with people who feel like they work at a feature factory. They're handed over requirements. They're told, build this. This is what the CEO wants. This is what the founder wants. This is what the client wants. Build, build, build. So you don't get to do a lot of discovery, but you can launch a feature, solid, and you know how to measure it. And you can report on it, but you don't get to take that signal and bring it into the top of the feedback loop and go build something new. Finally, product manager C. Notice I'm not including levels. That's intentional. Really high on people, really high on strategy, not a lot on discovery and not a lot on delivery. Who does this sound like? I love it. I love when people get the third one. Yes, this is probably a product leader because they don't have to be involved in the discovery, the delivery. They've got their teams doing. Again, someone at a high leadership level, really focused on other teams, making sure they're getting their work done properly. They're not out there applying new techniques to doing discovery or applying new techniques to do delivery because they're just not involved in it anymore. So the intent behind showing some of these examples is just to illustrate product managers face all kinds of different circumstances at their companies. This is also what makes it really difficult to hire PMs and succeed as a PM because it's not the same job at every company. We do different things. We're needed for different things. So what? So what's the point? Why did I come out here and have people do a little skill assessment to help them understand a little bit more about their skill depth? Well, what I've learned by working with, again, hundreds of PMs, all at different size companies around the world, is that most of them get close to zero input on how they perform as a product manager. They're usually just assessed by how well they align to company guidelines or company principles. That's what I faced for almost a decade was, hey, you're really customer obsessed, or hey, you really have backbone and you know how to disagree and commit. I'm like, well, that doesn't tell me shit about how I do as a product manager, which is what I really cared about. I want to do my job really well. How do I know I'm doing that? And so this is true for many people I've spoken to, right? You might have this annual performance review, but for PMs, especially those who come into meetups, who invest in their growth, they care deeply about how well they do at their job. But if they're relying on their companies to help them understand how they're performing, like there's a gap. So what do you do now? First off, doing a skill assessment is just a form of input. And it's also self-rated. People tend to rate themselves a little bit more highly when not challenged. So what I would encourage you to do as a next step is to try to bring up some examples, try to substantiate that rating with evidence, right? But then use this as an input to what to go focus on next. And that's really what I want to point to next. When you have a better understanding of your skills, you can make a more informed decision about where you want to invest your time, your energy, your money to achieve some future outcome that matters, right? So if you're low on discovery and that's something you see as an opportunity to grow at your current company, well, then maybe you should go take that class, or maybe you should go buy that book. Maybe you should go join that summit or event where you're going to learn and be surrounded by people that are going to help you build that skill. This can also help you identify what opportunities you have to improve. But I want to be real with you. Not every job you're going to have is going to have that opportunity for you. And so when you understand where that gap might be, you can evaluate, is there opportunity within this company for me to improve on that skill or not? And if there's not, and building that skill is something that you see connected to achieving a strategic outcome, well, that's a good sign it's time to get another job. And then finally, you can use this to build your own career roadmap. So what are you going to do the first half of 2026? I can't believe it's just a few weeks away. How are you going to build that roadmap? Well, you're going to understand what the strategic outcomes are that are important to you. Then you're going to look at maybe what skills you see as an opportunity to achieve that outcome. And then you can evaluate different actions you might take, put those on the roadmap, because no one else is going to put them there for you. You get to actually own this roadmap yourself. But by doing this, you'll be able to achieve, right? That's what we all care about as product managers. But these are outcomes that really matter to you. Thank you. So as a PM, I hope you all know feedback is super important. So if you feel like leaving any for me, that code is how you do that. I only have one last ask and then I'll hand it over. And that is, I'm trying to take selfies at all the different events that I speak at this year. So if y'all don't mind, just giving me a thumbs up. Thumbs up. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Questions for James? I can take this mic around the
questions.
audience.
Yeah, I got to do that.
Don't be shy.
So specifically, like as someone that comes from the startup world right now, how important do you think it is to actually have a deeper understanding, not only of product management, but also of like project management and financials to be a good product manager? Because if you're a bad product manager at a startup, you will bankrupt the startup because the runway will be increased massively because of a bad scope, because of bad assignments and whatnot. So how important do you think that is?
I always like to start answering this question by asking someone to first define the outcome that matters to you. So if you're working at a startup, what is the outcome that you're trying to make this decision based off of? Is it success of the startup or something else?
Well, specifically, as far as product management is, I guess, in the picture, I would say to identify, the goal is to identify as targeted as possible what you need to build at that specific moment. Don't lose yourself in the features. Like try to see what you're doing for what you're doing and what it's trying to achieve.
Without knowing a bit more about your specific situation, what I would say is assuming that the outcome that matters to you is success of the startup, right? This startup succeeds, it maybe lands its next funding round, lands its next client. Then you have to really decide, what do you have to do really well to make sure that you can achieve that outcome? And so if it's the next client, then hey, you need to be focusing on the right inputs to sell a client. Is that research data that says, hey, if you invest with us, you get this kind of outcome? Or is it you just need to deliver something to them because they're going to churn if you don't, right? And so then it's optimizing towards what's going to sustain the company. But don't do that for too long and just kind of do whatever the company needs you to do, because then 1 year will go by, 2 years will go by. Maybe that company is succeeding, but is it succeeding for you or is it succeeding for itself? Are you learning things that you can take to the next job? Is it your startup? If it's your startup, then like, hey, do all those things. But if it's not your startup, then what are you going to gain from it depending on its success?
Hello there.
Thank you. Hello.
So we are all facing fast-pacing environment, especially in regards to Gen AI. And the question would be about your advice to product managers and not only like technical leaders. Should we become builders? Should we build everything ourselves as product managers using those tools? Or maybe we should be on the tactical strategy level, just discussing the priorities and the roadmaps and timelines and delegating things to smaller and smaller teams, development teams, which will use those tools.
Right.
What's your take on that? Thank you.
So my personal take on this, having worked for 5 years on an AI product that now no one really cares about, which is Alexa, not really in the conversation when it comes to Gen AI and transformative technology of 2025. Product managers own value, right? And viability. And Gen AI tools can be just that, tools to help you achieve an outcome. And so I get really frustrated when I see stuff like the most important skill for product managers to learn now is AI evals. When 6 months ago it was, you have to be a prompt engineer. You got to write prompts. But guess what? Now Gen AI can just write its own prompts for you. And so what problem are we solving by learning to use these tools if all it's really doing is just saving companies money, right? So saving that company's money is an outcome that gives you some value, right? Then learn to use those tools. But if and use them for your job effectively and try to find a way to connect learning that with some outcome that matters to you. But I personally don't think that PMs, all shapes and sizes and different types of companies of scale, need to be like rushing to go learn how to use these tools. Number one, they're going to keep changing. Number two, I think we are starting to reach the edges of what some of these tools will be capable of, right? I actually gave a talk specifically on like managing your tech career in the AI bubble, because we are in a bubble. You know, Sam Altman said it himself. NVIDIA investing $100 billion by giving their hardware to an AI company that needs their hardware to actually run their not profitable business. like the house of cards is high. And so there's value in using these tools, but they're not skills. Gen AI is not a skill. Sorry, I could talk about that
Thank you very much.
all night.
And no, I really appreciate your answer. And a follow-up question,
Sure.
related but somehow different. What's your take on the job market in terms of the product management? You as a product leader, you have a lot of insights. So the question is how to build the effective product team.
Mhm.
Should that be a combination of technical people and product managers? Should they work separately? And again, getting back to the tools, what are the tools that you're using? Thank you.
Well, in terms of the product management job market, I would consider myself to be the most informed person about this in the world because I've been reporting on the product management job market every month for the last year and a half straight. And so that's something you can find on my LinkedIn profile at all times if you ever want to know. So I can speak to like the trends of what's happening in the product management job market. But your other question was about, hey, how should leaders be thinking about hiring product people? I'm going to just, a broken record, it's what are the outcomes that team is trying to achieve? What skills do they need for the team to be able to be successful to do that? And again, you've got different types of product managers who have solved different types of problems. Do you need a growth PM? Do you need someone who's just constantly running experiments and understands how to iterate on things to drive hundreds of basis points of improvement? Or do you need a PM who's really good at just thinking completely unconstrained about new problems to solve and ways to do that in an innovative and groundbreaking way? Those are two different types of PMs. And if you're trying to be every type of PM, then you're probably not going to succeed in the job market. And as a leader, if you're trying to hire a PM that can do it all, you're not going to find that PM because they're unicorns. They don't really exist.
So your talk on the PMs in the AI bubble sounds really cool. I'm sad I missed it. But I was wondering, because I think maybe PMs are thinking like, will we become automated by AI at some point? Like, do you think that this profession has a future? And if so, what does it look like? Because I sometimes think, oh, like I'm going to become outpaced by all of these random tools on the market. But similar to you, I feel it's not really worth it to just invest in something that could temporarily, like it could go away at any time. So
Right.
What is like the future of PM to you? What should we focus on in order to become competitive in that kind of
Well, so on that talk, luckily it was recorded. When I have the right to share it, to be watched by people who weren't at the summit, I absolutely will share it. In terms of like the future of product management, again, if you've used these tools closely, which, try to use them every time I get excited about some new thing I'm told it can do, I go and I try to build it and I reach the edge and I'm like, this is amazing what it does, but it doesn't do what I need it to do completely. I still need someone else to, actually make sure that there's proper foundation into what's being built. Because as PMs, like we're not engineers. We don't understand system architecture. Maybe some PMs do. Maybe some PMs used to be engineers and they know that really well and they're going to be better with those tools. But not every PM will. You talk to engineers who use these tools, they know the edges of them better than anybody. They're the ones who are most skeptical about what these tools are actually capable of doing. And so I do think PMs will continue to have a place. But I do think, like many jobs, AI will continue to make some tasks either done much faster, right? Or some that won't need to be done by hand anymore. And that's great, but that also applies to email. That also applies to fax machines. That also applies to doing virtual calls versus in-person meetings. Like these types of advancements happen. And they are transformative. And AI is probably more transformative than any of those other examples I've given you so far. But I don't believe that it's going to take us to a point where our job is completely eliminated. I think it just gets augmented. And so, again, understand your environment, understand what skills actually matter to achieve outcomes at the company or outcomes for you, and prioritize against that. But there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of people trying to sell you shit, right? I'm being real with you, right? I subscribe to those things. I follow those people. I spend way more time online than I probably should. So I see it all, but I also understand and I talk to PMs who feel the same way you do. They wake up and they're like, oh shit, I haven't learned this new skill. And should I? Just wanted to validate a bit of the concern, but my personal opinion is these tools aren't going to replace us. I think we're on the verge of those things. Like there's an S-curve of every technology ever. When you ride that S-curve on the way up, it feels like it's unthinkable what will happen in the future. That's how it was like working on Alexa. It was like, oh man, we're going to have this voice assistant thing everywhere. You'll be in elevators and you'll be able to talk to it and it'll know your calendar because it recognizes your voice. And guess what? We had the tech to do it, but no one wanted that. And then we started reaching the edges of what it could actually do. And the technology started to plateau and was replaced with LLMs. That too will have a plateau. You never know when you're there, but there's usually signs that you start to get. I'll also give a quick answer so I can hand it over to Matt.
Thanks for sharing. You told us to define our career roadmap. So I wonder how you figure out your own career roadmap in the past. If you can share, like, what is your future career roadmap?
Sure. Yeah. For me personally, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it started with writing the vision, right? So my vision is to help 1,000 product managers in their career. At this point now, I'm halfway through. So the next 18 months. Right, I wanted to help 1,000 product managers achieve career outcomes that matter to them. The strategy parts fall from that. What are the big things I think I need to do to achieve that outcome, right? And so, from there, it's like, okay, well, what skills do I need to give myself the opportunity to get into some of those opportunities? That kind of informed my strategy. But really, it all just starts with the vision. Where is it that you want to go? And there's some writing prompts you can take to do this. What are some things that inspire you? What are some problems that you feel some passion and motivation towards achieving or solving? And start there. So I want to thank you all for the questions, by the way. Really happy to answer them. And I'll be, of course, around after the talks are done and can thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let's give you a hand.
Boom. There we go. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out on this lovely Thursday evening. J'espère que je peux parler tout en français, mais quel dommage. So sometimes when I come to Paris, it's not to give talks, it's to play guitar. So you can't hear it, but that's me at La Boule Noire playing with my friend Will. I promise you that if you could hear it, you would all say, wow, he is so good at playing guitar. But when I'm not playing guitar, I'm helping people focus on the work that matters. I think James nailed it, right? We do this work because there are specific outcomes we seek to achieve. But in our day-to-day, we can be pulled into a lot of things that do not align with those specific outcomes. I would argue that when I have been a full-time product manager, I have probably spent most of my time working on things that do not actually align with those specific outcomes, if I've even taken the time to understand what those specific outcomes are at all. I'm here on the heels of a new book I've released called Impact First Product Teams. We're going to be giving away some copies of that book to folks who ask questions after my little talk. And the idea for this book really started with a single question, which is, if you were the CEO of your company, would you fund your own team? It's a big question. If you were personally accountable for the market level success of your business, would you look at your team as a line item on a spreadsheet, and it's not a small line item, and say, yes, I can personally vouch for this being a good investment for the business? Because if you as a member of the team can't answer this question, I promise you your CEO or your CFO can't answer it either. So I wrote this book in the hopes of giving you the conversation starters, some tools, some techniques, some approaches you can use at the team level to make sure you are well equipped to answer this question. And if the answer is not what you hoped it was, to make the changes you need to make at the team level. I've been going around for the last 6 months talking about this book, sharing stories and questions, but tonight is a special night, right? Tonight we're talking about product management turned inward. And I started thinking about, what is the inward dimension of this book? What is the part of this book that plays out in our organizations, but in ourselves? And I turned, as I often do, to one of my favorite philosophers, to Alan Watts, from his book, The Wisdom of Insecurity. And in this book, he says, tomorrow and plans for tomorrow can have no significance at all unless you are in full contact with the reality of the present, since it is in the present and only in the present that you live. In other words, we can make plans, we can seek certainty in the future. The only reality that exists is the reality that we live in right now. We don't know what the future is going to bring. And if we spend too long worrying about what the future is going to bring and trying to create certainty where there is no certainty, we actually deprive ourselves of our most important skill of all, which is to be present to what's happening and to change what we're doing as the world around us changes. So I started thinking about this, and then I started thinking about planning season, because it's planning season, y'all. Who here is in planning season right now, or OKR season, or quarterly planning, or yearly planning? A friend of mine was supposed to come to this event tonight, and she was like, can't make it in planning season. We do a lot of planning, especially at bigger organizations. We will plan for the next year. We will plan for the next 5 years. We spend a lot of time in the present trying to say with great certainty what we think is going to happen in the future. It got me thinking about something. Do you plan as a way to stay grounded in the reality of the present or to escape it? When we sit down and plan for the future, are we saying we want to be able to take a snapshot of what we see so that we can talk about it if we see something different? Or do we say being in the present is uncomfortable? I don't know what's going to happen. I don't like not knowing. I want to sit down and pretend that I will know what's going to happen so that I can stay grounded in that certainty, even in an uncertain world. Again, do we plan to help give ourselves an anchor in the present or to give ourselves an escape hatch from the present? And I will tell you, most of the organizations I work with, because I am usually brought in to consult with teams during or when they realize that their plans are no longer reflecting reality as well as they had hoped. In most cases, planning feels almost like a security blanket. It's a talisman. It's an artifact of safety. Even when the plan that's being followed, I worked with a company in 2020 that was in the middle of, there was a pandemic, right? A lot changed in the world. And I said, okay, I worked with their leadership team. I said, all right, we need a new strategy. And they said, why do we need a new strategy? We came up with a strategy. We spent 3 months coming up with our strategy. We can't just change it. The world is not what it was. But they were so attached to that vision of the future that they had crafted and to the work they had put into crafting it that they weren't willing to see most massive and undeniable changes in our reality. So I started thinking about the planning exercises I've gone through with leadership teams I work with. And what's the difference between planning to distance us from the present reality or to ground us in the present? So I think the number one anti-pattern I see, the bad thing that teams do is they plan and then they forget about it. They go through planning as an exercise. I see this a lot with teams that are using OKRs, objectives and key results. They say it's OKR season. We're going to pretend to care about our goals for a week and then we're going to never think about it again. That is not grounding us in reality, right? That's not giving us something we can check against and say, is the world progressing in the way we thought it would? For companies that are distancing themselves from reality, all their plans are purely at the output and feature level. So again, we don't have those outcomes, right? We try to have certainty by saying this is exactly what we're going to build and when we're going to build it. And if the world changes and people don't want it anymore, we don't want to hear about it. We planned it. It's on the roadmap. We have to build it. And last but not least, and this is again a bit of an inward emotional one, but I think it's really true. This kind of planning gives you a sense of comfort in the moment. In the short term, you feel very accomplished, right? We've figured out exactly what's going to happen for the next 5 years. It's in a slide deck that's 100 slides long. We feel that we've vanquished that sense of discomfort that comes from being in an uncertain world. Just for the duration of planning season, we feel that we can be in control. Now, what does it look like when we do things a different way? When we use planning to ground us in the constantly evolving present, then plans are used to mark changes and reevaluate assumptions. We look back at our plans and say, does this still make sense? And if not, why not? What's actually changed in the world? What assumptions did we make that are no longer true? How can we use our plans as a way to reflect back, as a mirror to show us what we through, why we thought it would be, and what's changed? When we plan to ground us in the present reality, our plans involve customers. These are good questions. And these are questions that often lead us down the path to doing the kind of planning that somewhat counterintuitively actually makes us more adaptable, right? This was a big lesson I learned the hard way. More planning can make us more adaptable if we do it well. So to bring this back to a concept from the book, if we look at what this planning actually looks like in practice, the kind of planning that takes us away from reality tends to look more like this picture on the left. This is when we cascade our goals, cascade our work from the company down to the department, to the team, to the smaller team, to the individual, until we have so many levels that we feel like we've built this perfectly controllable system. We took these big company goals that often require revenue, which require customer behavior, which require things to happen that we can't control. And we've cascaded them and cascaded them and cascaded them and broken them down until we've said, we're going to build these 10 things. And if we build the 10 things, everything's going to be okay. If we build the 10 things, we won't get in trouble. If we build the 10 things, we've done what we can control. We've done the right thing. That's not how the real world works. In the real world of our business, we can build those 10 things, and if the world around us has changed, we can deliver nothing of any value. Now, in Christina Wadka's book, Radical Focus, which is a wonderful book about OKRs, I highly recommend you read it. She recommends a different approach, which is to think about your company goals, what matters the most, the outcomes that your company cares about, those market and customer level outcomes, as the center of gravity. This is what everything else revolves around. And all of our team goals, our department goals, sit one step away from company goals. In one sentence, in one why statement, in one mathematical operator, we can get from our goals at any level back to the company goals. I've done this exercise with companies I've worked with, and the first thing they usually say is, well, but that leaves too much uncertainty. There's overlap. Teams might have overlapping goals. We can't cascade them down until each team has goals that don't overlap each other. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. And yet, that's exactly the point. Planning in a way that leaves a little bit of tension, that leaves a little bit of room to do the dance of alignment, that forces us into looking at these regularly and saying, how do these align with each other in the world that we currently live in? That's what good planning looks like. Again, cascading our goals feels good because it gives us the illusion of control. It gives us a 75-slide PowerPoint deck that we can point at and say, look, we did it. We planned it. We know exactly what we're doing. But that illusion comes at a cost. For companies and teams that have planned things down to the point where they say, we're going to build these 10 features no matter what, we're going to do it, we're going to do it, we're going to do it. That work feeds into a dynamic that I call the low impact death spiral. And every company I've worked with, every single one, is either in this spiral or is fighting its way out of it. Here's how it works. Teams do low impact work. They do work that's disconnected from the outcomes they want to achieve because they can control it. It's easy. They said they were going to do it. They're going to do it, right? We said we're going to build these features. We're going to build these features. What you wind up with then is more complicated products that have a lot of features. If you use most modern digital products, they feel like a collection of features more so than an actual usable experience. Because we have a bunch of teams that have to ship a bunch of features because they plan to ship the features. They said they'd ship the features. They spend a lot of time figuring out exactly how they're going to ship the features and when they're going to ship the features. But at the end of the day, we are going to ship those features. But what happens when we suddenly have these products full of features? Suddenly, we have more conflicts and dependencies to manage internally, right? When we go into our next planning season, well, if we want to make big changes, we have to think about these 10 little features we just shipped. We don't want to do that. That invites uncertainty. That brings up more questions. What happens if we change things we've already built? What happens to the people who are already using them? What if they don't like it? What if we have to work with another team that doesn't have the same ambitions that we do? That's scary. We don't want to do that. So what do? We go right back to the beginning of the spiral. We say we're going to build these 10 features that we can build ourselves because it's easy, we can control it, we can plan it, we can put it in a slide deck, we can build it. We don't have to think about what's actually happening in the real world. We don't have to talk to our customers. We don't have to do market research. It's fun. And this is a self-compounding dynamic. The more we do this, the worse it gets. To the point where I have worked with companies that say, yes, we know that our core product is terrible, but there's nothing we can do about it. It's too complicated. Of course, you can always do something. The question is, do you want to do something? Or does it feel better and safer to do those easy little things? Now, what's funny is a lot of companies I work with, they bring me in because they think that the conflicts are the issue. They say, we have too many dependencies. We need help with dependency management. We need to reorg for portfolio management. I have a friend who is in her 4th reorg of the year right now. Spoiler alert, none of these reorgs have solved any problems. You move pieces around, again, because it gives you a sense of control. If you're an executive, you can move the pieces around. You can move the people around. Are you moving it around in a way that grounds you in the reality of the moment you're in? Probably not. Now, again, you can't break out of the low impact death spiral if you don't know what exactly impact means to your team. And I think this is exactly what James was getting at, right? That if you don't know what the outcomes are that your particular team, your particular organization is working towards, all the work you do is going to be low impact. Now, I found that in my work, the most valuable thing I do with teams is helping them set goals that are high impact and high specificity. What do I mean by that? A high impact goal is affecting a metric that matters to the business, that the business at large cares about and understands. A high specificity goal means that we are affecting a metric that the business cares about by a particular amount at a particular time. Not just make revenue go up, not just make users go up, but make the thing the business cares about go up a certain amount by a certain time in a way that makes this team a good investment. That makes sure that we are delivering what the business actually cares about in the time frame it needs it. Here's another thing that's counterintuitive. I am a musician. Getting specific around numbers is not in my comfort zone. I'm very vibes oriented. I'm like, are the vibes immaculate? Do we have good vibes? I'm better with vibes than with numbers, which is why I spend all my money on clothes. But here's where it gets interesting. Having specific goals, planning for specific outcomes, actually helps us stay grounded in the constant change of reality because we can compare our real progress to the specific progress we had hoped for. If your team set out to have a specific market level goal, if you said you were going to bring in this much revenue by the end of the quarter and you haven't, then you have to go learn about the reality of the market. You do not have the luxury of being ungrounded from the reality in which we live. If you want to reflect against a specific high specificity, high impact target, you have to go out and learn about the world as it is. So the question I ask teams I work with, which is also from my book, is what measurable contributions will this team make to be considered a successful part of the business at a specific point in the future? I was recently brought on to help a team that was re-architecting an ad tech platform for a big company in the UK. And I asked them this question. I said, what measurable contributions will this team make to be considered a successful part of the business at a specific point in the future? And they said, thank you for asking. We have a whole PowerPoint deck that tells you exactly what our goals are. There's about 45 of them. They're all equally important, and we have to do all of them. And I said, yeah, I'm not reading that. Sorry, like if you have to look at a deck to know what success looks like, you don't know what success looks like. And they said, oh my God, Matt, I'm so glad you said that because we don't like the deck either. So we went and made a Miro board that has another like 40 goals. But these are the ones that we came up with that we really like because we think the ones the company gave us aren't right. And I said, yeah, I'm not looking at that either. What does success look like for this team in terms that everyone can understand that the business cares about? And they said, well, I think we had that same problem. So we made a second Miro board. So they have 2 Miro boards and a slide deck. I said, this is not going to fly. We're not doing this. So I had a workshop with the team to help them figure out what really mattered. And I love showing this picture because I'm really feeling myself, whatever I'm saying here. And this guy over here is just not convinced. He is not having it. He's like, okay, glasses, great idea. But we worked subtractively, right? We said if they had 5 goals, let's get it down to 4. If they had 4 goals, let's get it down to 3. Let's keep focusing down until we can get to the one thing. And again, people resisted this because the more we subtracted, the less control they felt. If you have 20 goals, 10 of them are features and 10 of them are outcomes, which ones give you that sense of control and certainty? The features. So we kept subtracting until we wound up with 2 options. Number 1, build an excellent, amazing, stupendous platform to increase our team's profits by 20% in the next financial year. Option 2, build a seamless, wonderful platform to increase our team's profits from 20 million to 100 million pounds in the next financial year. These look similar, but they are actually quite markedly different. One of them is a 20% increase, the other is a 500% increase. So I said, where do these numbers come from? I asked the folks who said 20%. And they said, honestly, 20%, I feel like that's a good investment for the team. That's a good return. Seems like a good place to start. Which is great because you have to start somewhere, right? Oftentimes, I feel like my job as a facilitator is to help create a space where people feel safe to say a number first. Nobody wants to be the first person to say the number. Somebody was brave enough to be the first person to say the number, and somebody else said, I heard that 20% and I remembered the number 20. I said, I remember something about 20. I don't think it was 20%. So I went on YouTube and found our town hall. And sure enough, this was what our VP actually promised to the market. Our VP actually told everybody, we're going to go from 20 million pounds to 100 million pounds. And unsurprisingly, they started to freak out. Exactly. It's a starting point. It's not a strategy. We still need a strategy to say how we're going to get there. But now they knew where they had to get. But then they said, you know what? The next financial year is like a year. It's like 10 years away. It's a later problem. Right now, we're really focused on what features we're going to build. We don't even ship this thing for like 6 months. Nobody's asking us about this. The business isn't coming to us saying, where's our revenue? They're saying, where's our roadmap with the features we're going to build? And I said, okay, let's do a little exercise. And this is an exercise I encourage all of you to do with your teams. I love this. It's so simple. It's like, let's just draw a timeline. Doesn't have to be a complicated framework. We don't have to say what's up. Let's just draw a timeline. It's March of 25. March of 26, we need 100 million pounds. What else should go on this timeline? And they said, all right, well, in October, we launch the product. We launch the new platform. I said, okay, so what happens between March and October, between now and October, if we don't ship anything? And they said, we make like 10 million pounds of profits. And I said, cool, just to be clear, what you're saying here, as you could tell from those 2 angry exclamation points, or question marks rather, I do know the difference between punctuation marks, I promise. What you can tell from those 2 angry question marks is, are we actually saying that our strategy is to ship something in October and then hope that it's good enough that we make 90 million pounds of profits between October and March? And here's where this gets really interesting to me. Once they looked at this, they said, we can't wait till October. Our strategy makes no sense. We have to go learn. We have to get a feedback loop with the market sooner. We can't just wait, ship something in October and hope that it's that much better than what we have now. Why are we talking about this as a single huge launch in October anyhow? Why don't we launch smaller things? Then they started asking those strategic questions. Well, do we start bringing more people into the current system, or do we try to get people into the new one once we ship it? How do we actually do this? They started planning. I talked to the leader of this team a couple weeks ago, and she said they started shipping in June. That once they actually understood what specifically the business required of them, they understood that they did not have the luxury of living in the future. They had to live in the present. They had to get a feedback loop with the market in place as quickly as possible. Again, committing to goals and targets outside of our control is scary, but it's real. It's the reality of the work we do. I worked with MailChimp for 3 years leading up to their acquisition by Intuit. And it was really interesting seeing what happened. They were, when I started working with them, they were very planned. We have to do this. We have to do this. Every team knew exactly what they were going to work on. Their CPO, Natalia Williams, who lives in Paris now, she couldn't make it tonight. She's now a Parisian girly, and we love it. She said to the team, look, you've got all this work planned. I get it. But what I want to see is a specific increase in the number of users who get to value. The conversion rate of folks who get in the door and send that first email, I want it to go up this much by this date. because we're building a lot of new features, but if those new features make it harder for people to get value, we shouldn't build them. And I worked with a product manager named Carrie Tian, who does not live in Paris, but she's also great. She went and did some research and found out where people were getting stuck, where we were losing people. A lot of it had to do with this button that now says buy now that used to say add to cart, which is another story. But she basically gathered together all the product managers at MailChimp, and she said, I've found the 5 things that if we fix them, we can achieve the target that our CPO gave us. And everyone got really nervous. They said, well, but we have plans. We have a backlog. We have a roadmap. We can't just go and change it. And Carrie said, well, we have to change it because this is what's real. These are the things that if we fix them, it will directly give us what our CPO told us matters the most. Who's going to fix this? And one by one, each of the product managers said, I'm sorry, I agree with you, but it's just not what I have planned. It's not what I have scoped. And Carrie paused for a moment and she said, I hear you and I understand you. But I will haunt all of you in your dreams until we fix these 5 things. And everyone laughed. It was this really funny moment because, again, people wanted to retreat to that comfort and safety of planning. And she kept pulling them back into the present. Look, this is what we need to do. And yes, it's a little scary. Yes, we're not sure exactly what it is. Yes, it's not in our backlog. But if we believe that this is what's going to achieve the outcome, then this should be what we're prioritizing. I want to share with you one last quote from Alan Watts before I take your questions. Because I think about this when I think about that moment where everybody was clinging to their backlog, clinging to the plan. The desire for security and the feeling of insecurity are the same thing. To hold your breath is to lose your breath. A society based on the quest for security is nothing but a breath retention contest in which everyone is as taut as a drum and as purple as a beet. Does this sound like some of your organizations, maybe? A breath holding contest? I share this with you because I hope you can take away that even though living in the present is scary, even though planning in a way that keeps our goals high level, that doesn't cascade and control, feels uncomfortable, on the other side of it is freedom. On the other side is the freedom to live in and look at the reality of our business, the reality of our customers, to be open and curious and not afraid. Here's a QR code where you can find stuff about me. I write periodically. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find. And I'm very easy to find now because I am standing directly in front of you, waiting to answer your questions. Thank you so much. And let's talk about stuff.
Thanks. One eager hand is going to get a book, I think. First one up. We'll take a few now and then.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. I had one question. How do you convince product leaders or an organization leaders of thinking in terms of impact? Because in my experience, I've done a lot of companies that were like, we're doing OKRs. It was actually a feature list and they care more about feature delivery than ever the numbers. So what would be your tip?
I'm so glad you asked that. I was talking to somebody recently who said, I feel like my job is to fight with the business to get the business to care about the business. And he said to me, look, I've tried to get them to stop doing output-based roadmaps and start doing outcome-based roadmaps. They won't do it. And I said, well, okay, well, if you're doing output-based roadmaps, can you start to put outcomes on those roadmaps? Can you do this in a yes and way, in a way that doesn't tell leadership stop doing what you're doing, but takes what they're doing and starts to connect it with things? So rather than saying we're not going to have features, we're not going to have outputs, saying like, okay, well, like, here's what we think the impact of each of these things is, and here's how we're prioritizing. Is there a way to give them what they need and start to build out that system deliberately and as patiently as you can? Because I think that's the way to do it that I've seen be more successful.
Okay, so you try to do kind of a 5 ways to make the objectives come beyond the features.
Or just at the team level, start saying like, all right, if these are the features we're building, what's the impact of these features? Let's estimate the impact at a team level and then put that on the roadmap we share with leadership. So even if they're not asking for it, we can say like, yeah, here's the features we're going to build. Here's the ones. And by the way, you might notice one of these is a lot more impactful than the others. So should we think about maybe doing things differently? Let them make the decision, but give them the information and start to make that connection at the team level and bring it to them before they ask for it. Because by the time they ask for it, it's usually too late.
To elaborate on that question,
Yes.
is there specific ways to push big organization? And I'm thinking even outside of software, because we talk a lot about features.
Yes.
But other types of organization towards tests, and especially the one that have to report. We're talking about stock exchange, like big group. How do you do that?
I mean, I think big organizations move very slowly and in very small increments, right? And I think I've seen that it's it's nearly impossible to get the whole organization to change at once. Even when you do a reorg, like you change the shape of it, but the same dynamics are at play. I think it happens conversation by conversation, artifact by artifact, at the team level first. There's a reason I wrote this book at the team level, not at the organization or executive level. Because when I've seen this work, it's been individual teams that have started doing those very things, saying, okay, here's how we're thinking about impact. Here's how we're thinking about our goals. Here's how we're thinking about the work that we're doing. And then over time, that starts to be adopted, non-linearly and not consistently, but it starts to change the conversation until eventually the old system can no longer stay as it was. You have to kind of disrupt the equilibrium of the old system bit by bit before a new system will form around it. So I think for me, the question is always like, what can we do at the team level now without having to wait for big organization level changes? Because we're going to be waiting a long time. In a lot of cases, those things aren't going to happen. So I think I wish I could say that there was like a thing that like, oh, just share this with them and tell them this. Give them a copy of my book and they will surely change their ways. Which, please feel free to. But I think it's...
I agree. And I have a second question, which
Sure.
is the goal setting. Like,
yes.
How sometimes it's the problem, having that vision of those specific numbers. And,
Yeah.
And at the team level, especially, how can you help the teams figure it out?
I mean, that's a lot of what I do, right? Is that facilitation work, sitting down with teams. There's a few tips in the book, which you are now getting a copy of. What I find really helpful is to just look at orders of magnitude. Just say like, is it 10, 100, or 1,000? Is it 100, 1,000, or 10,000? Like people get really stuck on trying to get the number perfect when the number exists, again, to help give us a mirror and an anchor, not to be perfect. So I find it really helpful to say, look, we're not trying to find a perfect number. Is it 1x, 10x, 100x? And usually just from there, it gives you a little bit of like, I worked with one team that was responsible for getting new users onto a rebuilt version of an HR platform. And I was like, okay, cool. How many users by when? And they said, we can't answer that. We don't know. And I said, well, how do you make decisions? If you're building a platform for 10 users by the end of the year or 10,000 users by the end of the month, you're going to make entirely different decisions. And they said, well, let's go ask. I said, before you ask, what do you think is the right number? Like, before we just go to leadership and say, how many? What's the number that we're going to feel good about? And I said, end of the quarter, is it 100 users, 1,000 users, or 10,000 users? And one of the engineers on the team said, gosh, if we could get 1,000, I'd feel really good. And again, that wasn't a strategy, but it was a starting point. So we could go to the CPTO and say, look, we want to get 1,000 by the end of the quarter. She was like, okay, cool. Yes, let me know what support you need. So again, I think a lot of it is just facilitating that space where people feel comfortable and are willing to have that conversation in specific numbers without feeling stupid or feeling like they're wrong or there's something they're missing that they should know. Ooh, a speaker on speaker question.
I have a copy of the book, but thank you. So at the start, you asked, hey, if you were the CEO of this company, would you fund this team?
Yes.
And it's a provocative question. But my question for you is, for the people that you've shared this idea with, what do you find is a common first step people can take towards answering that question if they don't have the answer to begin with?
Yeah. I mean, I think a common first step is, again, to look at your team goals. Say, what is this team responsible for? Do we know what success looks like for this team? Because if we don't, then it's basically an impossible question to answer, right? And I do think again, going back to my vibes-based worldview, it is a question that often comes back to a vibes-based answer in terms of like, most teams I ask this question to, they get nervous. They're like, I don't know. I don't really know. Or they say, oh, absolutely not. No. I've worked with 2 teams in my career that have actually either disbanded themselves or changed their entire remit based on this question. One team was a sort of special ops team of 7 really good principal engineers who were told to go find problems to solve and then solve them. Turned out they were spending 90% of their time finding problems to solve and 10% of their time solving them. And they were like, we would be so much more effective if we just staffed to a team. If it was just like, there's 7 of us, let's figure out which team needs us at the beginning of the year, and then we can move around as needed. And they did that. And having been in some of the executive conversations, they were very smart to do that. Another team was basically like, we're responsible for this tiny feature. If we do everything we wanted to with this, it doesn't cover a quarter of our salaries. So we need a bigger purview. Like, we just need to take bigger swings, which I think is often what teams wind up understanding, is that because it feels safe, because it feels easy, they are an expensive team taking small swings. And sometimes if you want to be a team that's worth investing in, you need to be willing to take those bigger swings that require you to learn about your customers, that require you to do research, that require you to do a lot of things that can make you uncomfortable.
So basically, there is always a lot of talk about the impact of the features themselves, a lot of about the revenue that there could be there. However, there is not enough mention when it comes to the costs of the features.
Yes.
And especially when it comes to the features themselves, not only how much they cost to make, how much they cost to operate and how they will affect other features that you'll make. And lastly, the cost of opportunity for making other features that would be much more valuable. And of course, there is not enough talk about it. So what's your opinion on this?
I agree with you. I think sometimes when people talk about the cost of doing nothing, I sometimes like talking about the benefit of doing nothing. Where I'm like, okay, let's estimate the impact of this and estimate the impact of not doing anything. Like, if we built this versus if we fired the whole team and didn't pay them their salaries, what would actually be more impactful to the business? And once you start looking at those compounding costs over time, you realize that you're not competing with like the status quo. You're actually competing with like cost savings for the business. I mean, I think a lot of folks are learning that the hard way right now, right? That like your team comes at a cost to the business. And if the work you do is simply incurring additional cost to the business, then saying, well, we did what the business told us to do isn't going to keep you safe, right? Again, I think there's a reason a lot of people feel like they are now fighting the business to get the business to care about the business, because executives can tell you what to build. And if you build it and it doesn't work, they're not the ones losing their jobs. I remember when Spotify laid off a bunch of people 2 years ago, and they were like, we have too many teams doing work around the work. And I'm like, that's what you hired them to do. Like, you hired all these supporting and operational teams, and then you were like, why are there all these supporting and operational teams? Let's fire them. It's like, again, part of the reason I wrote this at the team level is that the teams bear the consequences of this. Whether or not it's fair and just and correct, the teams are the ones who are bearing the consequences of businesses that are more interested in the theatrics and the illusory certainty of planning than in the actual hard work of thinking about impact.
Hello there.
Hello.
I believe we've got a chance to meet a couple of months ago in NYC Bubble's office. We got a very similar discussion.
Yes,
I remember you.
Good to see you.
Yeah. Good speech, yeah. The question is going to be about the client's feedback, right? So you mentioned on a couple of occasions that polishing the features before the launch doesn't really make sense, and I think we all agree. We are on the same page. But there is a concept of building POC. Instead of like talking to the client over and over again, we can build something that is going to be very light and not that expensive, building on top of that previous question. What's your take on that? And would the POC be a part of the client's feedback? Thank you.
Yeah. So, I think when we talk about proof of concept, when we talk about prototyping, this is another area where I get grumpy about AI discourse, because it's like, we can make a perfect prototype of anything right out of the gate. And it's like, well, sometimes we don't want a perfect prototype. Sometimes we want something to be rough so that we can validate if the core idea is actually right. I mean, this has been a conversation, and I'm sure you would learn about it in one of the trainings here at the laptop, right? Is that you have low fidelity and high fidelity prototyping for a reason. Low fidelity prototyping isn't just bad high fidelity prototyping. You're trying to learn different things and validate different assumptions and ask different questions. And I think that in this rush to make everything as finished and polished as possible right away, we're losing sight of something that we've actually known for a long time. And I think we're going to have a lot of companies building a lot of shit features because somebody showed them something that looked really polished and fancy before they had done any actual validation work. And they can also say, look, with AI, we can build this for you right away. I think we are going to see a glut of low impact features that are costlier to maintain than features in the past have been because they're built hastily and poorly. And because people fall in love with the speed and coolness and polish of the prototype rather than the actual question of, is this solving a problem for people? So I think that the discipline of low fidelity prototyping, the discipline of like proper lean startup style MVPs where you are trying to maximize learning and minimize upfront cost and learn around specific things around the business model, around is there something transactable here, is going to be more important than ever. And it's going to require more fighting for it than ever. Because why would you do that when you can vibe code something that looks perfectly finished and polished in 10 minutes?
Let's give another hand to James and Matt. Thank you so much. And to the laptop. Last thing to know is our next product tank date. You want to pencil it into your diaries. It will be at WeFit. It will be published soon on Meetup. So in theory, you're all signed up. You should get the notification. But hopefully we'll see you again on December 4th.